All right, everybody, let's go ahead and get started. So once again, my name is Kevin Hancock, Director of Solutions here at Exostar, and thanks for joining me today for our webinar, CMMC Policy Framework, Key Controls and Best Practices for Success. Before I dive into the formal presentation, just want to cover a couple housekeeping details. So today's session is scheduled to last 45 minutes to an hour. That does include Q&A. Now, you're going to be muted during today's presentation. However, you can submit questions via the chat feature. I've got a colleague on the line with me who will answer those questions as they come in over chat. However, any that haven't been answered or he hasn't had a chance to get to, I'll also check into chat at the end of today's conversation to see if any more have come across. A number of you did submit questions prior to today's session. What I've done is I've sprinkled those throughout today's webinar when they pertain to a particular topic that I was going to cover during today's session, just so I can go back and reemphasize those parts for people that had particular questions. Now, if one of the questions you have is, will I receive a copy of today's slide deck or a copy of today's presentation? The answer is yes. So as a follow-up to today's presentation, you'll be receiving an email from us with both a copy of the deck today, as well as a link to a recording of today's session. Now, if during today's session we have an outage, you can just wait for a minute and try to reconnect. You can do that a couple of different ways. You could just refresh your screen and come back in, or if that doesn't work, you can go back to the email that you received and use the link in that email to come back into the session as well. If at any time you'd like to speak with someone from Exostar or get some more information about us, you can reach out to us actually a couple of different ways. You can email us at cmmc-team@exostar.com, or you can come to our website, and there's a form there on every page that you can fill in and ask questions that way as well. So with that, let's dive into today's presentation. So here's the agenda I'll be covering. And as I mentioned, what I've done is, as people submitted questions prior to today's session, I've put those into the sections that they pertain to using this agenda. I've got those called out and I'll answer them as they come in. I provided where I could some additional detail and websites and things like that to provide a little more in-depth information about that. This is particularly important to that section on level 1 and level 2. A number of people have been asking questions about level 1 itself, so I did just want to provide some additional detail around that as well. Now, first, just kind of recap where we are in the process. So CMMC has been formalized. That CMMC program was waiting for 2 insertions into the Code of Federal Regulations, 32 and Title 48 of the CFR. 32 was passed much earlier, right? That went into the Federal Registry back in 2024 on December 16th. And what that rule did was put in place the CMMC program. It explained the program, gave the details around it, the key terms, explained those, etc. What Title 48 CFR, that's the acquisition rule. So that's what allows the DoD to put clauses into contracts that require contractors and subcontractors to adhere to the CMMC ruling. Just a reminder to everybody, what CMMC changes isn't necessarily how you're supposed to protect controlled unclassified information or federal contract information. What it did was formalize an assessment program. So if you are part of, or if you receive, I should say, controlled unclassified information, or you create it, it changed the rule from a self-attestation model to one where you're required once every 3 years to have a certified third party assess how you've implemented those NIST 800-171 controls. It provided some further definition and clarification of the roles and responsibilities of cloud service providers and external service providers who you may be utilizing to fulfill part of your cybersecurity requirements. But the major difference is it moved away from a self-attestation model to requiring this certified third-party assessment. Now, that's not for all levels, but it is the major change in the program. Now, those CMMC levels are as you see here. Right? There's level 1 that has 15 requirements. Those are laid out in the actual contract vehicle itself. It's the 52.204-21 clause. And that clause has 15 requirements. There's level 2, which you'll be required to adhere to if you receive controlled unclassified information as part of your contract or because you're a subcontractor who may receive it as part of a contract. This is the one that requires you to safeguard that controlled unclassified information in accordance with NIST 800-171. And that requirement's been in place for a number of years. However, as I mentioned, the change is that you may be required to have a certified third-party assessor come out and evaluate how you implement those 110 controls and that you actually do what you say you do. And they'll do that assessment and validate that you do those things. Level 3, small portion of the defense industrial base would have this requirement. However, this increases the number of controls you must have in place from that 110 to an additional 24. So 134 overall requirements. And this once every 3-year assessment is done by DIBCAC rather than a C3PAO. Now, we did have some questions, as I mentioned, about the different CMMC levels. So let me call those out now because I just talked about this. So number 1, what are the level 2 differences as to why would one want to self-assess at level 2 versus get a C3PAO level 2? Now, it's a great question because CMMC does say that there will be some contracts that allow for a self-assessment and others that will require a certified third-party assessment. Now, the answer here is that it's really not up to you. It's up to the contract. And the contracting officer will determine what contracts they're comfortable with allowing for a self-assessment versus that certified third party. So it's in order for you to bid on those contracts or be a subcontractor to one of those contracts, you're going to have to meet the requirement of that contract. And if you're waiting until the contract is actually let or put out for an RFP, you're probably not going to have time to react to what those contract requirements are. So if you think you're going to be bidding on contracts that require level 2, I think it's going to behoove you to get that third-party assessment. Now, you could roll the dice and see and only bid on contracts that allow you to self-assess. That's kind of up to you, and it's a business decision you're going to have to make. So number 2, do you have to be registered or certified to conduct a CMMC level 1 assessment? So a CMMC level 1 assessment is something that every organization that's trying to do CMMC level 1 is required to do. You're required to do an assessment of how you have implemented those 15 controls, or 15 requirements, I should say, those 15 requirements, and you're then required to attest that you do those things. And just like in level 2, you're going to go into the SPURS system and register that attestation and affirmation in that supplier performance risk system. Even as level 1, that's where you're going to register that you do these things. Now, obviously, you yourself, you're going to have to be comfortable making that assessment and affirming that you do those things. If you're looking for somebody to help you, I would look to an organization that's part of the Cyber AB, that's probably already themselves or CMMC level 2, just to get their expertise in NIST 800-171. But there's really no formal, requirement on you to be registered or certified or anything like that in CMMC. But you got to be comfortable with the implementation of those 15 requirements. So number 3, what can serve as proof of work in progress while on a path to CMMC compliance? So I think the real thing that indicates your proof of progress is your system security plan and your self-assessment of that plan. So, even today, there are contractual requirements, and we'll cover these in just a minute, that say, hey, if I'm agreeing to this contract, I say that I protect information in accordance with NIST 800-171, that I've done a self-assessment, and I've done that self-assessment, and I know my score to enter into the SPRS system. So that plan that you should have in place, that system security plan, because that's really the only way you can do a self-assessment. So your progress in building out that plan, and you're doing that self-assessment, and then obviously creating the necessary plans of action and milestones to address those controls you may not have in place, would be evidence that you're on a path to get to CMMC compliance, because you know where you're at and where you need to get to, and you have a plan in place to reach it. So, and then as you close out those items, you should then update your plan and your SPR score, and then enter that into the SPRS system. And, or if you're being asked by third parties or primes to provide your SPRS score or where you are in your CMMC journey, you'd be able to say, hey, here's my SSP, here's my open POAMs, and here's my score. So that's kind of how you prove that path and prove that you're on that path to compliance. So number 4, can you shed more light around CMMC level 1 self-assessment requirement? Now, this confuses a lot of people. So on the DoD website, and I got this chart. Oops, thought I could back up. Oh, I can't. From the DoD website, saying that there are 15 requirements, and there are, right? Oops. And they are here. So if you go to this link, this is the FAR clause that lays out that level 1 requirement. And these are the 15 requirements that it relates to. Now, the confusion comes about because if you map these 15 requirements to NIST 800-171, it actually maps to 17 controls. So that's why you see some of this confusion. So the clause calls out these 15 requirements, but if you map these to NIST 800-171, there are actually 17 controls. And just to point out, the reason is that some of these sentences they have as requirements actually have semicolons and so have additional requirements. The best example of this is number 9, right? Escort visitors and monitor visitor activity. So, but you also, to do that, you must maintain audit logs of physical access. You must control and manage physical access devices. Those things are individual controls in NIST 800-171. So that's kind of one of the main reasons you get 17 controls and 15 requirements. So hopefully that cleared up that misunderstanding for a lot of people. So again, just remember, if you map these to NIST 800-171, you're going to be meeting 17 of the NIST 800-171 controls, but in this FAR clause, it's 15 requirements. All right. So as we mentioned, right, CMMC will formally go into effect. And by effect, I mean it can start to appear in contracts really on November 10th of this year. So a little more than a month, or I'm sorry, less than a month. I'm sorry. It's October 20, not October 22nd. So it's less than a month, and that's when it may start to appear in clauses. However, there is a phased implementation approach that the DoD will be using. And that's what is laid out here, in this link that you'll get in the slide deck will take you right to this plan on the DoD website. This first year, it's expected that you're still going to be able to self-assess level 1 and level 2. Self-assessments will still be the norm. And so after that first year, when phase 2 starts, that's where you're really going to start to see the requirement for level 2 certification. But that's also why people are starting to line up today to get those certified third-party assessment organizations to do their assessments, because they don't want to wait till the last minute. They know there's a line, there's a limited number of see-through POs, etc. So that's why you're starting to see this. Phase 3 is when you'll start to see the level 3 certification be required. And then phase 4 is full implementation after those first 3 years. Now, the one caveat here is that little blue box at the bottom, and this again is taken straight from the DoD website. In some procurements, the DoD may implement CMMC requirements in advance of the planned phase. That will be contractually driven. It'll be up to the contracting officer to determine if or what kind of level they want to implement on a particular contract. But it is expected that the first year, still self-assessments. So, if you're looking for it's going to be due on this date, I would look for November 10th of 2026 as the day that CMMC level 2 certified third-party assessments may be required in contracts. Okay, now that doesn't mean that you don't have any requirements currently, right? As I mentioned, this requirement to safeguard controlled unclassified information in accordance with NIST 800-171 has been around for a long time, right? These DFARS clauses in your contracts, or that have flowed down to you because you're a subcontractor, these have been in place for a number of years. These clauses are called out there, you see on the left, the 252, 204, 7012, and 7019 clauses. These say that if you receive controlled unclassified information, you must safeguard it in accordance with NIST 800-171. The 7019 clause says that you should do a self-assessment of your implementation of that program in accordance with the assessment guide. That's the NIST 800-171 alpha. That assessment guide will lead you through each of the 110 controls. You get to say whether or not you've implemented that control or whether you haven't. And you get a numerical score, somewhere between a 1, 3, and a 5, or a corresponding -1, -3, or -5 based on a particular control. So your score is going to range somewhere from a -203 to 110. And that's the score that you enter into the Supplier Performance Risk System. That's the SPRS system. This is a website that only DoD has access to and their contracting officers. This is where they look at the risk of a particular supplier, and their score for this cybersecurity risk is one of the values that they consider in your overall supplier risk. Now, as I mentioned, if you're doing level 1, there is a place to register your assessment of your and your affirmation that you do level 1 as well, that you meet those clauses around federal contract information safeguarding as well. So it's both level 1 and level 2 need to enter that they do these things. With level 2, you score yourself. In level 1, it's either met or unmet a particular control, or not applicable. And if it's not applicable, you have to say why, right? And then you either have it implemented or not. So we had some questions about the SPURS reporting. So how do I submit the CMMC data into the SPURS system? So I've given you the websites here on the page, right? So this page is the SPRS CSD, .mil site. But in order to get the cage code for your organization and to register, you actually register at pie.eb.mil. That's where you register your organization. That's where you'll get your cage code. Then you can go into the SPURS system. That cage code will be tied to your organization, and then you can enter that information. Okay, so how do we assess ourselves? So the first thing you need to ask yourself is, what is the extent of my system? Because the first thing that organization or that certified third-party assessment organization is going to ask you is, okay, am I evaluating your entire business because you have controlled unclassified information everywhere, all your systems are part of it? Or is this a case where you have an enclave and you've got a well-defined scope of that particular system? And the best way to determine that is to follow the CUI in your organization. Determine how it enters it. Like, so do I go to sam.gov or something like that and download RFPs that may have CUI? Do I receive CUI in the execution of a contract from an SFTP site from a particular prime? Is it emailed to me or to a particular individual? How do I get that information, and how do I bring it into my organization? Who in my organization can handle that information? Where is it processed? So is it a document, a Word, an Excel, etc., that I'm utilizing those same applications on my desktop machine? Is it data that I'm pulling down and then entering into another system? So where is that information stored, processed? Where do I transmit it from, and who do I transmit it to? Is it somebody in my organization? Is it somebody outside my organization? Then think about the support people that you may have of those different systems. And some of these things may be manual systems, right? You may have a locked file cabinet where you put CUI drawings or information that you receive via mail, mark CUI, and you put it into this secured file cabinet. Who has access to that? Who can see that data? Where are we processing it? What desk are we taking it to? Those kinds of things. So all of those kinds of things go into a data flow diagram that should be one of the pieces of evidence that you have available for that certified third-party assessment organization when they come on. What you're also going to want to do is draw that network diagram, because though CMMC and NIST 800-171 encompass more things than just IT. There are other parts of your system other than just your electronic systems. However, your electronic systems most likely will be a portion of this flow. And if that's the case, you should lay out that network diagram. That creates an overall system diagram. And some of that system diagram may be physical things. Again, it may be different buildings. It may be different rooms, different areas of your facilities. It may be a locked room with locked file cabinets. It may be a server room with a locked door, things like that. All of those things are classified in different categories. And so you should also lay out that network diagram. So again, when that C3PAO comes to you and says, okay, this is what what are we evaluating as part of your system security plan? You can provide them that. So that gives them their scope of the assessment. What are we taking a look at? What are we evaluating? What are we determining is part of this? Because that's going to limit, if you will, what they're actually looking at. Or if you don't have it, they're going to look at your entire organization. And they're still going to expect the same kind of thing around your entire organization, because they need to know what to evaluate, what they should be certifying against during this assessment process. Now, just to refresh everybody, if you look at NIST 800-171, there are 14 control categories. There are 110 individual controls within these 14 control categories. Now, typically, when you're writing policies, you're writing a policy about access control, right? We limit access to only those information systems that are essential for an individual's job. Something like that. That's your overall policy. Then you'll have the individual controls of what you do to enforce that. And you do that for each of these things. So that policy statements are those broad things at both the category level and then across each of the different controls. And then you go down to the individual controls themselves, where you'll typically have an implementation statement. So this is how we implement this particular control, right? So, one of the security requirements, control the flow of CUI in accordance with approved authorizations. So you should have an implementation statement of how you do that, right? Only, typically, in order to get access to CUI, people must be approved. They request that approval through email, ticketing system, directly to their supervisor. That person opens a ticket to IT, et cetera. Or if you're a small organization, hey, everybody gets access. We control it through a group. In Entra, we add them to that group and they get it. There are things like that. What you'll need then is not only that implementation statement, but you'll need evidence to support how you implement it. So, if you lock down things via Entra groups, or you provide role-based access controls from a particular application, you'll want a screenshot or something about that shows how you've actually implemented it. So that's your evidence that you do it. The assessors may also ask an individual from your organization that's assigned that task to create those accounts, give users access, et cetera, to actually show them how they do it, how they do it, because they're going to determine if they're actually doing it in accordance with your actual defined implementation, right? You told us this is how you do it. Let's see somebody on your staff actually do what you say you do, and then they're trained correctly on that. And then that assessment, that control, if you will, is assessed. We mark you off, check, yep, you do those things, great. And then typically all controls need a periodic review and and test to see that they still do those things. And that documentation that we reviewed it, that we've done a test on it, et cetera, is also part of your overall records. Now, if for some reason your organization changes something, right? You change out of technology, you buy a new company and you've implemented something that they brought over rather than what you had. That's okay, but you need a plan in place to implement that new method. You need to write the new implementation statement. You need to obviously address that and update your controls, et cetera. Now, that typically won't engender an entire new review and a new certified third-party assessment. You'll need to document that you've done those things, that you've implemented this new technology. It does, if you will, the same job. It just kind of does it in a different way or in a different manner. We've documented that, we've tested it, we've trained our new person, and then that's identified in that next third-party assessment organization cycle. So once every 3 years, that would be assessed, but you would need to make sure that you've documented that you've done those things. So we had one question that came in about controls. It often is the case about FIPS. So how to implement FIPS validated cryptography. So this is control 3.13.11. This control says, right, that if you're encrypting data in transit or at rest, it needs to be in accordance with a FIPS validated FIPS 140-2 validated algorithm. So to implement that, it's typically done at the application level. Most applications today, and this includes like your laptop, have utilities that allow you to encrypt information on that device, in that application, etc. And it needs to be a FIPS validated cryptography algorithm. And you need to document which method you've done, and then that it is FIPS validated. Now, the one issue you'll run into in this is that manufacturers, when they push those updates to you, will sometimes update their algorithm before they've gone through the FIPS validation. That's okay. And you just need to note that. You need to ensure that what algorithm's being used, and that that validation is coming. So you just need to keep up to date on those things. Okay, so as I mentioned before, when you do your assessment, this is before the third-party assessment comes in, right? This is when you're doing your self-assessment. Like, am I ready to engage with that certified third party? This is when you can take a look and you can use that assessment guide, the 800-171 Alpha, and it gives you a scoring algorithm, 1, 3, or 5 points, to determine whether or not you've implemented a control. And now, when I say you've implemented, when you're doing your assessment, you need to be hard on yourself. You can't just say, oh, yeah, we do that. I know, we do that. You have to make sure that you've met the assessment criteria, that you have an implementation statement, that you have an overall policy around that particular thing, that you have an implementation statement for that particular control, that you've got evidence that you have in support of how you've implemented that control, that you've tested your staff that they actually follow the way you implement this, and that you periodically review it. If you have all those things, that's when you can say, yep, we're good on that particular control, and you can give yourself the corresponding point. When you get to 110, you'll know that you're ready to engage with that certified third party. Now, if you don't have a control in place, that's typically when you're going to open a POAM, a plan of action and milestones. POAMs, so when we talk about POAMs only being allowed for particular controls, what we mean by that is that's when the assessor's on site. So if the assessor's doing their assessment, sorry about that. If the assessor's doing their assessment and they're on site and they find that you haven't implemented a particular control, they've got a couple of different things they can do. They can, if it is one of those allowable, worth 1 point, and is one of the 1 point ones that is okay, you can open a POAM against that, and you'll have 180 days to close that from that same assessment organization. Once you've closed that, then you'll receive your third-party assessment right, certificate. You've done it, you're good, you're level 2. But you're going to be in a conditional status until you get that done. The other way you can look at a POAM is that's while you're in this, am I yet at 110? I'm not ready to engage with an assessor yet. Then you can use POAMs to help manage your overall assessment, right? I know I have an open, I don't have this assess or this control done. Here's my plan to get it done, and here's the date on which I want to get it done. So that's my plan of action and milestone. Now, if I change a control after an assessment's been done, right? I have a new authorization system. I have a new policy, procedure, a new tool, etc. That's okay. Again, you can implement those, and then you don't necessarily open a POAM against it. There's a new thing called an OPA, operational plan. Oh, sorry, I forgot what it stands for. But that's how you implement a control like after your assessment's done. So the assessment guide I'm showing you here. This is the link to it. And then these are the different 5-point and 3-point controls. Now, these are the 1-point controls that can't be open when that third-party assessment organization is in. And you'll see often many of these correspond to those FCI requirements around level 1, right? Level 1 says you must escort visitors. You must have physical access logs. You must manage physical access. You must have control of public information. You must control external connections. These are all things that relate to those FCI controls. So that's why these are POAMs that can't be opened when the assessor's there. Now, as I mentioned, if you've got one of those 1-point controls that can be done, and the C3PO finds that during the assessment, they're going to give you a conditional pass. You'll have 6 months, 180 days to close out that particular item. You'll engage back with that certified third party, and then you'll have them reassess, see that you do that control now, that you've passed, and then they'll update everything, and you'll receive your level 2 certification. Now, to help you out through this process, Exostar has a number of applications and services engagements that can really meet you wherever you are in this process. We call this our Exostar CMMC Ready Suite. It's 3 SaaS applications, 2 that help you with documentation and management of the overall CMMC program. That's our Policy Pro and our Certification Assistant. Policy Pro is an application that helps you develop those high-level policies. It provides you templates for each of the different control families and the corresponding controls in those families. Once you've updated those templates to meet your organization, or if you've developed a policy for another standard, maybe you have an ISO certification and you created a policy for that, you can run those and the ones you create in Policy Pro through an AI engine within the application. You'll get scored and provided feedback on how well that policy meets the requirements. You'll get things that we call KENNIes, key elements not included, on both the control and within the overall category, to determine whether or not or what you might want to add in to improve that overall policy. Certification Assistant walks you through that self-assessment process and really allows you to manage your overall CMMC program. It's going to allow you to define that overall system, put in the information that defines it, go through each of those individual controls, put in your implementation statement, put in your policy that corresponds to that, link in your evidence or upload screenshots and things like that. The output of Certification Assistant is an SSP with a SPURS score along with it, an evidence list of everything you've uploaded around that. So it allows you that one central location to share out with that C3PAO when they come on site to, let them know exactly where everything is and how it corresponds to your system. If you need a place to store, process, and transmit CUI, Exostar's managed Microsoft 365 is that solution. This is an enclave up in GCC High built on top of Microsoft Teams with an Exostar application embedded within it that puts in the guardrails to allow you to store, process, and transmit that CUI. It satisfies 85 of those 110 controls there within the enclave. Exostar also has a number of partners that can really work with you wherever you are in that CMMC assessment process. If you want somebody to do a readiness assessment to see if you are, ready to engage with a C3PO, or just where you are in general. If you want somebody to come in and do a mock assessment because, well, I think I'm ready, but I'm not quite sure. I think I'm at 110, but I'm not real confident in the way I've scored myself. One of Exostar's partners can come in and do that mock assessment for you. And these are often C3PAOs themselves. And then Exostar has a number of partners who are C3PAOs that can engage with you when you're ready for that step as well. As I mentioned, Policy Pro allows you to build policies, customize templates, score those, and understand whether or not you need to add in, subtract, make this more robust, add in some key elements you need to update, etc. Certification Assistant, just a reminder, manage that overall CMMC program, understand where you are in your journey, and what you need to get done to complete it. And then, of course, our EMM 365, Exostar's managed Microsoft 365. We have this solution for both small, medium, and large enterprises. The major difference is a shared tenant versus a single tenant, but they both work the same way. If you'd like to learn more about any of these solutions, we have dedicated webinars about these solutions as well. Just come to the Exostar website, www.exostar.com. You'll see the various webinars when you look up the individual products. Now, as I mentioned, this really lets you meet that challenge of becoming CMMC ready, meet those requirements when the contracts are there for you, let the primes know where you are in your CMMC journey, and obviously also possibly get to that next step where you may also need to start identifying the subs that you work with, where they are in their CMMC journey, and start to track that as well. Because at the end of the day, it is about securing the entire defense industrial base and the supply chain that goes along with it. So I did get a couple of questions about Exostar's CMMC Ready Suite. I know a number of you are users of different components of it, so I wanted to answer those as well. So these are related questions I got. So if a defense contractor operates an Exostar enclave with downloaded print capabilities enabled and CUI is involved, does the supplier's equipment accessing the enclave automatically fall within the scope of CMMC compliance? So what we found in talking with C3PAOs is that yes, you will. That even though the Exostar enclave does not leak anything by default into a browser, doesn't leave anything in the browser itself if you close it, they're still going to count that machine in as part of your scope. The idea here is that your web browser itself is processing that CUI. Now, to help solve this, Exostar will be introducing another component of our managed Microsoft 365 or what that will be is a VDI solution for people who need to get a secure desktop managed by Exostar as part of that to satisfy this question. Number two goes hand in hand with this, right? because Exostar does allow you to actually block downloads with an external permission within the enclave. So you can block that download programmatically and not allow it to sync, not allow it to print, do anything like that. And this question is about, well, what if I also write a written policy that I just don't allow my people to do that and I train them on it, right? So alternatively, can the supplier rely solely on an internal policy restricting themselves to view-only access? Specifically, would such a policy alone satisfy an assessor in the absence of corresponding technical controls on the supplier system? The answer that we've heard is no. That if a corresponding technical thing can be put in place, a technical control, not a thing, but a technical control be put in place, it must be, and that a written policy isn't good enough. All right, so if you are looking for a C3PAO, and we did one of the questions we got, which is this one. Oh, I'm sorry, which I thought I wrote that one down. I didn't. I did get a question about how do I know which C3PAOs are valid, or how do I find the right C3PAO? So the one place to go is here. I put the link here. This is the marketplace on the Cyber AB. The Cyber AB is the organization that accredits the different kinds of organizations that are part of the CMMC ecosystem. This includes registered practitioner organizations, RPOs, MSPs that act as RPOs, also includes those CMMC training groups. I forget what their acronym is, but it also includes C3PAOs itself. This link will take you to their marketplace. It's got a handy drop down with, I want this kind of service. I want it from this location, or I can leave it open. Exostar partners with 4 different organizations that are C3PAOs. They are obviously certified by the Cyber AB. SICH is currently a candidate organization for that C3PAO status. The others are already part of the ecosystem. They're already doing CMMC assessments today. All of these are familiar with Exostar and our tooling as well, but they obviously work in general across the CMMC ecosystem. Ecosystem. Sorry about that. All right, so I've also included some useful sources of information, and that concludes our presentation today. I'm just going to take a look at the chat to see anything else that may have come in. So it looks like my colleague has been answering the questions as they come in. So let me go down to the new messages. We got a question about cost. Joey will send you out an email and follow up on that question with you individually. You can also go to our website and see the pricing there. It's available publicly. All right, everybody. I think we answered all the questions as well. So with that, everybody, I want to thank you for your time and attention today. Please let us know if you have any additional questions. Fill out our form, send us an email. We'd be more than happy to answer them that way as well. So with that, thanks again for your time and attention. Looking forward to working with you. If you need anything else, just let us know. Take care and have a great day.